Apollo 11, the day humanity left. We came in peace for all mankind. Those words are still resting on the moon today, etched on a small metal plaque, left behind by three men who dared to go where no human had ever gone before. In the aftermath of World War II, as the world rebuilt from ashes and fear, two superpowers emerged, each with its eyes turned not toward the Earth, but toward the endless black canvas above it. The United States and the Soviet Union stood on opposite ends of a divided world, their rivalry not only political or military, but cosmic. When the Soviets launched Sputnik 1 in October 1957, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth, the echo of its signal wasn't just heard in the radio frequencies of scientists. It was felt in the hearts of millions. Humanity had taken its first mechanical step beyond its cradle. But for America, it was a wake-up call. The race had begun. In classrooms and kitchens across the United States, fear and fascination intertwined. Could the Soviets reach the moon first? Would they dominate the space above, just as they sought dominance on Earth? President Dwight D. Eisenhower responded by creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958, uniting brilliant minds under a single purpose: to ensure that freedom, not tyranny, reached the stars first. But it was President John F. Kennedy who transformed a competition into a destiny. Standing before a crowd at Rice University in 1962, his voice echoed through time. "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." That single line carried more than inspiration. It carried the weight of a nation's pride, the risk of failure, and the promise of greatness. The Apollo program was born, a monumental challenge to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade's end. At the time, no human had even orbited the moon, no computer was small or powerful enough to guide such a mission, and the technology needed did not yet exist. But NASA accepted the impossible. Thousands of engineers, scientists, mathematicians, and dreamers poured into the effort. The hum of slide rules, the tap of typewriters, and the whir of drafting machines filled the air at Cape Canaveral, Houston, and Huntsville. It was an age of courage wrapped in uncertainty. Every test flight could end in fire. Every launch was a gamble with human lives. Yet, one by one, the pieces fell into place. Mercury proved that man could survive in space. Gemini taught astronauts how to maneuver and dock spacecraft. And Apollo would take them further than any human had ever gone. At the heart of it all was the Saturn V rocket, a behemoth of engineering, taller than a 36-story building and powerful enough to lift the weight of a small destroyer into the heavens. Built under the direction of German-born engineer Wernher von Braun, it was the most complex machine ever constructed by human hands. Each of its three stages burned with fury, consuming tons of fuel every second, producing a thunder that could be heard 50 miles away. The ground trembled, windows shattered, birds fled from the trees. The Saturn V wasn't just a rocket, it was a promise made metal. In the training centers, three men prepared to fulfill that promise. Neil Armstrong, a calm and methodical test pilot, Buzz Aldrin, a brilliant engineer with the soul of a fighter, and Michael Collins, the quiet command module pilot who would orbit above them as they walked the moon below. Together, they carried not only their own dreams, but the collective hope of humanity. Training was grueling. They practiced in mock lunar modules, spent endless hours in simulators that spun them in disorienting motions, and endured weeks in isolation chambers. The pressure was relentless. Any mistake could mean death, not only theirs but perhaps the end of the dream itself. As 1969 approached, the world held its breath. The decade was nearly over, and Kennedy's goal still hung in the balance. Previous Apollo missions had ended in both triumph and tragedy. The Apollo 1 fire in 1967 had killed 3 astronauts during a test on the launch pad. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee burned alive in a sealed capsule filled with pure oxygen. It was a devastating setback, one that almost ended the program entirely. But NASA rebuilt from the ashes, honoring those lost by pressing forward with even greater resolve. By the summer of 1969, all eyes were fixed on Florida. On July 16th, beneath the hot sun of Cape Kennedy, the world gathered to witness history. Families huddled around televisions. Millions tuned in across continents. Even rival nations paused to watch. At precisely 9:32 a.m., the engines of Saturn V roared to life. The Earth shook as 7.6 million pounds of thrust tore through the sky, lifting the spacecraft higher and higher until it disappeared into the blue. Apollo 11 was on its way. Inside the command module Columbia, the three astronauts floated in silence. Through the small window, Earth was shrinking, beautiful, fragile, alive. The voice of mission control echoed in their headsets. "You're a go for TLI, translunar injection." With a deep rumble, the spacecraft turned its nose toward the moon and fired its engines once more, leaving home behind. For 3 days, they drifted through the void. Radio transmissions grew faint, and then the Earth became a pale blue marble in the distance. In that vast loneliness, there was a strange peace. Buzz Aldrin later called it magnificent desolation. They read from the book of Genesis as they passed into lunar orbit, a poetic moment of humanity reaching beyond faith, beyond fear, into the unknown. When the lunar module Eagle separated from Columbia, Armstrong and Aldrin held their breath. The descent toward the moon was perilous. Alarms blared. The onboard computer, barely as powerful as a modern calculator, was overloaded. Dust rose beneath them as they searched for a safe landing spot. Fuel low, mission control warned. Armstrong's heart pounded. With less than 30 seconds of fuel left, he guided the craft to the surface and calmly said the words that would echo forever. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Applause erupted across the world. People wept, shouted, prayed. For the first time in history, humans were on another world. Yet the moment of true immortality came hours later. Armstrong descended the ladder, paused, and set his left foot onto the lunar soil. His voice crackled over the radio. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." On that barren gray landscape, Aldrin soon joined him. Together, they planted the American flag, not as a symbol of conquest, but of courage. They left behind a plaque that read, "We came in peace for all mankind." The two men spent just over 2 hours on the surface, collecting samples, taking photographs, and gazing at the distant Earth. Meanwhile, above them, Michael Collins orbited alone. He was the most isolated human in existence. Every time he passed behind the moon, radio contact was lost. "I'm alone now," he later wrote, "but I am not lonely." When Eagle rejoined Columbia, the three men prepared for the journey home. The engines fired one last time, and the spacecraft began its return to Earth, streaking through space like a shooting star. On July 24th, 1969, they splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. The mission had succeeded. Humanity had done the impossible. But what lingered after Apollo 11 wasn't just pride. It was perspective. For the first time, humans had seen Earth from afar, a delicate sphere of blues and whites, without borders, without divisions. Astronauts spoke of the overview effect, a shift in consciousness that made national conflicts seem small against the backdrop of the cosmos. The moon landing was more than a technological triumph. It was a mirror held up to humanity itself. The images of the astronauts on the moon spread across newspapers, televisions, and hearts. Children dreamed of rockets. Nations united, if only for a moment. For a brief time, the world looked up together. In Houston, a small team of engineers embraced, exhausted but exhilarated. Years of calculation, failure, sacrifice, and courage had led to this one moment. And though Kennedy did not live to see his dream fulfilled, his words had carried humanity to the stars. The Apollo 11 mission changed everything. It proved that even in a world divided by ideology and fear, humanity could unite under a shared dream: to reach, to explore, to discover. When the command module Columbia plunged through the Earth's atmosphere, fire licked its sides and plasma blazed like the fury of a dying star. For a few terrifying minutes, radio contact was lost. In mission control, men held their breath, eyes fixed on the countdown clock. Then, through the static came the voice they were desperate to hear. Columbia, Houston, we read you. Cheers erupted. Humanity had not only touched another world, it had come home. As the capsule splashed down into the Pacific Ocean, parachutes billowing like orange flowers, 3 weary men floated inside a cocoon of steel. They were alive. They were heroes. Navy divers swam toward them, attaching flotation collars as helicopters hovered above. When the hatch opened, a wave of humid air rushed in, Earth's breath welcoming her children home. Yet even in triumph, there was caution. Fears lingered that lunar microbes might have come back with them. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins were placed in quarantine for 21 days, peering out at the world through glass, as if they were both pioneers and prisoners. When they finally emerged, the world exploded in celebration. Parades filled city streets. Flags waved not only in America, but across continents. In that moment, they weren't just astronauts. They were emissaries of all humankind. Behind the smiling faces and ticker-tape confetti, though, the reality of what had been achieved was almost unfathomable. Just a decade earlier, no one had even escaped Earth's orbit. Now, humans had walked on another celestial body. It was as if millennia of myth, the dreams of Icarus, the hopes of Galileo, the equations of Newton, had converged in one fiery moment of triumph. But while Apollo 11 fulfilled Kennedy's vision, it also raised a new, unsettling question. What next? For NASA, the answer was more missions. Apollo 12 followed just months later in November 1969. Its crew, Pete Conrad, Alan Bean, and Richard Gordon, landed precisely where mission planners wanted, proving the accuracy of the program's technology. They brought back more samples, deployed scientific instruments, and joked on live TV. Conrad, stepping onto the moon, famously said, "Whoopee, man, that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me." It was proof that space exploration could carry not only gravity, but humor. The world, however, was already beginning to change. The wonder of Apollo 11 gave way to routine. Each mission seemed a little less miraculous than the last. By Apollo 13 in 1970, tragedy nearly struck again. An oxygen tank exploded en route to the moon, crippling the spacecraft. The phrase, "Houston, we've had a problem," echoed through history. The crew, Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes, fought for their lives as engineers on the ground worked around the clock to bring them home. Using nothing but ingenuity, duct tape, and courage, they turned a disaster into one of humanity's greatest rescues. When Apollo 13 safely splashed down, it reminded the world that space was still a place where the margin for error was thinner than air. Meanwhile, back on Earth, public interest waned. Vietnam raged. Protests filled streets. Budgets tightened. Many asked, why spend billions going to the moon when there are problems here? The dream that once united the world began to fracture under the weight of earthly struggles. Apollo 14, 15, 16, and 17 would continue, each bringing new discoveries. The rolling of lunar rovers across alien soil, the study of ancient rocks that predated Earth's continents, the simple joy of watching astronauts bounce in the low gravity. In December 1972, Apollo 17 carried Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt to the moon. As Cernan took his final steps, he paused, looked back at the Earth hanging in the sky, and spoke softly, "We leave as we came, and, God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." Then the engines roared, and humanity left the moon for the last time. The Apollo program ended not with a bang, but a whisper. 12 men had walked on the moon, all Americans. Their footprints, undisturbed for decades, remain the only human marks on another world. The flags they planted still stand, bleached white by sunlight, silent witnesses to the greatest adventure ever undertaken. But Apollo's legacy reached far beyond those footprints. It transformed how we saw ourselves. The photographs taken from lunar orbit, especially the iconic Earthrise and blue marble images, changed the human psyche. For the first time, people saw Earth as a fragile oasis in a vast void. Borders vanished. Politics shrank. We were one planet, one species, alone together in the cosmos. Environmental movements, peace initiatives, and scientific collaborations all drew strength from that new awareness. In schools, children dreamed not of war, but of stars. Scientists who had grown up watching Apollo would go on to build the next generation of spacecraft. The Space Shuttle, the International Space Station, probes that would touch Mars and the outer planets. Apollo had ignited a chain reaction of curiosity that would ripple across centuries. Yet the story of Apollo was not without sorrow. Behind the triumphs lay sacrifices, lives lost, families strained, engineers who never saw their names in headlines. The cost of reaching the moon was measured not only in dollars, but in devotion, in sleepless nights, and unanswered prayers. And as the dust settled, some felt a hollow silence. Once humanity had touched another world, how could it go back to being content with the Earth? NASA shifted its focus to orbiting Earth. The Skylab missions followed. Then the shuttle era began in 1981. Space became accessible, but also ordinary. The moon, once a dream, became a memory. Still, every time a rocket launches, every time a spacecraft leaves the atmosphere, a piece of Apollo rides with it. Its courage, its vision, its proof that impossible is just a word waiting to be rewritten. For the astronauts themselves, the return to normal life was anything but simple. Armstrong retreated from public attention, preferring the quiet life of a teacher. Aldrin struggled with depression and the weight of fame, yet became a passionate advocate for continued exploration. Collins wrote, painted, and reminded the world that adventure must be tempered by reflection. Each carried the moon in their hearts, forever changed by what they had seen. In time, Apollo became legend. History books captured the facts, but the emotion, the awe of watching humans stand under alien skies, could never be fully written down. For those who lived it, the sound of the rocket's thunder still echoed in memory. The glow of the lunar horizon forever burned behind their eyes. When we look back now, more than half a century later, the scale of what was achieved still defies comprehension. No digital computers as we know them, no artificial intelligence, no precision GPS. Everything was done by human minds, human hands, and courage that outweighed technology. The astronauts trusted slide rules, analog gauges, and faith in themselves and in the thousands unseen who guided them from below. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Apollo is not the technology it inspired or the discoveries it brought. It's the reminder of what humans can do when they act not as nations, but as one people. The moon landing stands as a testament that we are capable of greatness when we look beyond division and choose wonder over fear. In that sense, Apollo was not just a chapter in history. It was a mirror held up to the soul of humanity. It asked a question that still echoes through time. If we can reach the moon, what else are we capable of? And the answer, whispered in the hum of satellites and the gleam of space stations, is simple. More. Always more. Long after the dust of Apollo settled, its echoes still pulsed through every wire, every classroom, every dream that dared to look upward. The moon landing had not simply ended a race. It had redefined what it meant to be human. Before Apollo, the sky was the limit. After Apollo, the sky became only the beginning. Children born in the 1970s grew up with a new vocabulary of wonder. Rocket, astronaut, mission control, liftoff, words that once belonged to scientists became the language of imagination. Toy rockets replaced toy soldiers. The heroes of bedtime stories were no longer knights or cowboys. They were explorers in silver suits, floating in the silence of space. Art, music, and cinema reflected this awakening. Pink Floyd sang of lunacy and starlight. Filmmakers imagined alien worlds. Writers dreamed of futures where humanity lived among the stars. A generation looked upward, not inward. In universities, physics departments swelled. Young engineers who had watched Apollo 11 from their living rooms now built satellites, telescopes, and computer systems. The technology born from the moon program spilled into everyday life. Microchips, telecommunications, medical imaging, weather forecasting, even the materials in sneakers and helmets. The very act of reaching the moon had accelerated civilization by decades. What began as a geopolitical contest had become a catalyst for human evolution. But beyond the technology, something deeper changed: perspective. The Earthrise photo, taken by astronaut William Anders during Apollo 8, had shown our planet floating alone in the blackness. No borders, no divisions, just a blue marble cradled in darkness. It became an icon of unity, the seed of environmental consciousness. "We came all this way to explore the moon," Anders later said, "and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth." From that image grew movements that reshaped our world. Earth Day, climate research, conservation efforts. For the first time, humanity saw itself as a single organism living on a fragile sphere. The moon landing had lifted our eyes outward, only for us to truly see home. Yet, even as the Apollo glow illuminated the world, it cast long shadows. The end of the program left thousands of engineers and workers adrift. Factories closed. The roar of the Saturn V fell silent. The once mighty vehicle assembly building stood like a cathedral without a congregation. People who had spent their lives chasing the impossible now wondered what came next. The great machine that had united the best minds of a generation had no new horizon to chase. Still, the spark refused to die. Scientists proposed grander visions: Mars colonies, nuclear-powered spacecraft, orbital cities that circled the Earth like silver rings. Most never left the drawing board, but the dream remained. The spirit of Apollo hid in the circuitry of every invention that followed, whispering, "Remember what we achieved when we dared to reach higher." And reach higher we did. The 1980s and 90s saw a new kind of exploration: robotic, precise, unrelenting. Voyager 1 and 2 carried human music beyond the edge of the solar system. Hubble revealed the universe in color and clarity our ancestors could never imagine. Mars became a target not of competition, but curiosity. Probes landed, rovers rolled, and cameras sent back landscapes eerily familiar, horizons of dust and dawns that looked a little like our own. Apollo had not been an end. It was a beginning, a first step into a cosmic ocean. Meanwhile, on Earth, culture wrestled with what it all meant. Philosophers debated whether humanity was ready to leave its cradle. Artists painted moonscapes not of gray dust, but of emotion, loneliness, hope, ambition. Religion and science briefly touched hands in awe, each seeing in the moon landing a reflection of its own truths: the grandeur of creation, the boundless reach of human will. Armstrong's words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," became a mantra for possibility. They appeared in classrooms, speeches, even on protest signs. Whenever a barrier was broken, a disease cured, or a record shattered, the phrase echoed again. It had become more than history. It was part of human DNA. But time erodes even miracles. As decades passed, Apollo's immediacy faded. The world turned to other concerns: economic crises, wars, digital revolutions. Space became background noise, no longer front-page wonder. A child in 2020 might look at the moon and think not of Armstrong, but of algorithms that map its craters. The romance of exploration had been replaced by the convenience of technology. We reached for the stars, and then somehow forgot to look up. Yet every so often, something reignites the flame. A rocket arcs into the sky, its engines thunder, shaking glass across miles, and hearts remember. SpaceX, Artemis, the new lunar missions, they all stand on Apollo's shoulders. They are proof that the dream was never lost, only waiting for a new generation to listen. And still, the moon waits. Unchanged, untouched, silent. Its dust holds our history. Its craters cradle our curiosity. The footprints left in 1969 remain there, undisturbed by wind or rain, immortal testaments to courage. They are not just marks of where we went, but of who we became. Looking back, it's clear that Apollo was never just about the moon. It was about perspective, about daring to imagine a species capable of cooperation, precision, and hope in equal measure. It was about what happens when imagination becomes policy and policy becomes history. The men and women who built Apollo never saw themselves as magicians. They were mathematicians, welders, seamstresses, computer programmers. Some stitched space suits by hand. Others calculated trajectories with pencils and slide rules. Together, they composed a symphony of science and sweat, a song that still plays in every rocket's roar. Perhaps the greatest irony is that Apollo, an achievement born from the Cold War, ended up uniting the world more deeply than any treaty ever could. When humans first walked on the moon, even their rivals cheered. In Moscow, Soviet citizens gathered around radios. In villages across Africa, people looked up at the same moon and whispered prayers. For a fleeting moment, we were not Americans or Russians or Europeans. We were Earthlings, and maybe that is the true legacy of Apollo, that in touching another world, we learned to see our own differently. Now, as new rockets prepare to return humanity to the moon, the question arises again. What will we learn this time? Will we go for science, for profit, for survival? Or will we go simply because, as George Mallory once said of Everest, it is there. The moon does not care why we return. It will wait, silent and eternal, its surface holding both our footprints and our reflection. But for us, the journey back will not just be a step into space. It will be a return to ourselves. Because the truth is, Apollo was never only about exploration. It was about identity, about a species daring to ask, what is our place in the universe? And for a brief, luminous moment in 1969, we answered, not with words, but with action. When Neil Armstrong stepped into that endless gray expanse and left a single boot print in lunar dust, he gave humanity something no telescope or theory ever could, proof that we belong to the stars. When the last Apollo mission lifted off on the lunar surface in December 1972, few realized they were witnessing not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a long silence. The engines thundered, the dust rose, and humanity's final footprints on another world were cast. As the capsule disappeared into the blackness above, a question remained suspended in the void. What comes next? For decades, the answer is uncertain. The moon, once a stage for triumph, became a symbol of nostalgia. The Saturn V rockets were dismantled, the launch pads grew quiet, and the astronauts who had seen another world aged into history books. Yet, while the roar of the rockets faded, the whisper of what they represented never stopped echoing. Apollo had been more than metal and mathematics. It was a mirror held up to humanity's potential. Every rivet, every calculation, every second of courage reflected what could be achieved when imagination met discipline. The Apollo program proved that collaboration across thousands of people, hundreds of fields, and a single unifying goal could move not just a rocket, but a civilization. In the years that followed, space exploration took new forms, subtle, patient, and robotic. Machines became our eyes and hands among the stars. Voyager sailed beyond the solar system, carrying golden records filled with the sounds of our planet. Mars became familiar through the tracks of rovers that whispered across its crimson plains. Telescopes unfolded in orbit, capturing the birth of galaxies billions of years away. Apollo had taught us to reach. Now we were learning to listen. But for all its brilliance, technology alone could not satisfy the human longing to go. There is something ancient in us, a hunger to see with our own eyes, to stand where no one has stood before. It is the same instinct that drove the first sailors across unknown oceans, the same curiosity that led nomads to cross mountains and deserts. That impulse, buried deep in our DNA, stirred again. By the early 21st century, new players emerged. Private companies reignited the dream, not as a competition of nations, but as a partnership between humanity and innovation. Rockets became reusable, sleek, and intelligent. Launches that once required empires now took place in the deserts of Texas and the coasts of Florida. The cost of spaceflight fell, and suddenly the stars didn't seem quite so far away. NASA's Artemis program promised a return to the moon, not for flags and footprints, but to build a future. The goal was no longer just to visit, but to stay, to learn how to live beyond Earth, to create habitats that could one day survive the harsh winds of Mars. This time, astronauts would walk not as symbols of power, but as pioneers of endurance. And yet, beneath the machinery and ambition, a quieter transformation was unfolding. Humanity had begun to see the universe not as a destination, but as a context. The moon was no longer just an object to conquer. It was a reminder of our fragility, our resilience, and our smallness in the vast Black Sea. Every photo of a distant planet, every radio signal from a satellite, whispered the same truth: we are part of something immense. The legacy of Apollo lies not only in museums or data archives, but in the shift of consciousness it sparked. It showed that unity is not a dream, it is a requirement. That survival, progress, and discovery all demand cooperation across borders, languages, and beliefs. The stars belong to no nation. They belong to all of us. Generations born long after Apollo still carry its fire. Students in cramped classrooms watch old footage of the moon landing and see not history, but possibility. Engineers in Kenya, India, and Brazil build rockets from scrap metal. Children in rural towns write astronaut on the lines that ask what they want to be. The dream transcends geography. The sky has no nationality. The next frontier is not just Mars. It is understanding what exploration means in a world that is both fragile and fierce. As climate change, war, and division test our planet, the stars remind us of perspective. The same courage that took us to the moon can help us save the Earth. The same curiosity that built rockets can build peace. Exploration is not escape, it is evolution. Someday, when the first humans walk on Mars and look back at the tiny blue sphere hanging in the sky, they will feel what the Apollo astronauts once felt, a mixture of wonder and responsibility. They will know that every mountain climbed, every life risked, every sacrifice made was part of a single, unbroken story that began when we first looked up at the night sky and asked, "What's out there?" And when they take that first step into the red dust, perhaps their words will echo Armstrong's, different in sound, but equal in meaning. A small step, another leap. Because exploration is not an act we perform once. It is a promise we keep forever. In the end, Apollo's greatest gift was not the moon itself. It was perspective. It gave us a way to see ourselves not as separate nations, but as one species capable of greatness. It taught us that the impossible is temporary, that the stars are not out of reach, and that the future belongs to those who dare to imagine it. The footprints on the moon remain untouched, silent, and eternal. But they are not monuments to the past. They are invitations. Every grain of lunar dust pressed beneath a human boot whispers the same message across time and space. Come back. Keep going. Don't stop. Because the story of Apollo is not over. It lives in every rocket that rises, every telescope that peers into the unknown, every dreamer who looks up at the moon and feels that familiar pull in their chest. The same pulse that beat in the hearts of those who first left Earth still beats within us. And perhaps someday, when the lights of human cities shine across more than one world, someone will look up at a new sky, smile, and remember how it all began, with a single step on a distant silver world and a promise that we were meant for more.